All right, so we're beginning our first session here. I'll announce each of the presenters individually. We'll have 45 minutes total for each of them. So first we have the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Voelkel and the Reverend Dana Neuhauser. Dana Neuhauser. I read it out transcribed, Dana Neuhauser, who will be speaking to us on Sacred Reckonings, White Settler Colonizer Churches Doing the Work of Reparations, a workshop. So yes, we'll be talking to each other. Thanks so much. Welcome.
Make it somehow. Yep, here we go.
Absolutely.
Well, let's just say a couple more words about ourselves. I'm Rebecca Voelkel, and as many of you know, I also completed my Doctor of Ministry here at UTS in 2013, and I serve as the pastor for Justice Ministries at Lindale United Church of Christ, where I also direct the Center for Sustainable Justice. And I do get to do some adjunct teaching here at UTS, for which I am deeply, deeply grateful.
My name is Dana Neuhauser. I'm a United Methodist deacon, and my primary work is actually with Sacred Reckonings, and I do a lot of other duties as assigned, really. My connection to UTS is I did take one class as part of my seminary work, so I have a fondness for this.
Excellent. Well, the project that Dana and I work on together is called Sacred Reckonings, as you've heard, and we're gonna do a kind of fly through a very quick, hopefully a nice taste of what we're about, and perhaps we can have more conversation later on. And I feel the video at the end of chapel feels like a really lovely setup for the work that we're going to be talking about, and also Dr. Marshall's presentation on Monday night. So we're hopefully going to kind of encourage people to start making connections between other parts of the symposium week and what we're talking about.
So just before we get started in earnest, I want to just invite us into a time. So when we do this work of Sacred Reckonings, there's a lot of hard truth telling that we do about our history, reckoning with like big history, like the doctrine of discovery, more personal history, like our own familial, ancestor work. And we don't want to engage in any of this work as vilifying those who came before us. Like we want to actually build this from that place of joy and building something new and healthier and more whole by vivifying our descendants. So this moment that we'll enter into, I just want to invite you to bring to mind a great, a biological or spiritual great-great-grandchild. So think a few generations ahead if your time is linear. And hold that image in mind and consider what kind of ancestor you want to be to them. And just to reiterate, it might be a familial descendant, it might be a spiritual descendant, but who do you want to be? What kind of ancestor do you want to be? So before we get started, I'm sorry, I didn't call you back. Welcome back. That was a rough transition. I apologize. I do want to acknowledge the voices and the influence and the inspiration that went into the creation of Sacred Reckonings. It was primarily written by Jessica Innermill and the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Voelkel. But that was shaped by hours and hours of listening, of being mentored by, and getting feedback from various BIPOC colleagues. So you can see on the screen a snapshot of some of those folks. Particularly want to lift up Pastor Jim Bear Jacobs and Reverend Pamela Gojiri from the Minnesota Council of Churches, the co-directors of racial justice. And yeah, there's probably even more than what's on here.
So we're just gonna, as I say, do a very quick spin through that which is Sacred Reckonings. And sorry to stand in front of you. I don't know if exactly. So we're gonna do a little bit of an overview and then dive more deeply into one area around this practice of truth telling. But we want to just give you a bit of that overview. The first thing I want to share is that the entire guide is available free for download at sacredreckonings.com. So feel free to check it out more fully. And it is designed as it's an 11-step faith-based community organizing and educational guide for predominantly and historically white churches. The model, and we'll talk a little bit later about the repertory eco map, but the model is very much able to be used in other contexts, particularly this repertory eco map. But as we're talking, we are primarily focusing on the legacy of the doctrine of discovery. And there is a particular responsibility for historically and predominantly white Christian churches in that legacy of the doctrine of discovery. And so most of we do train multiracial congregations, but most of it is the focus is on the work of white folks. And we, as Dana said, are, because of the focus on the doctrine of discovery, the definition that we use for reparations, which we'll go into more detail on, focuses on both Black and Indigenous communities. And so the legacy of chattel slavery as stolen land and stolen labor and attempted genocide. And it centers around the work of the repertory eco map. And the other piece to say is that in our work, we try very hard to mitigate against the notion of white saviorism. And instead, our focus is the ways in which the legacy of the doctrine of discovery is damaging for all. It is damaging in different ways and particular ways, and we talk quite a bit about that. But the work of dismantling the doctrine of discovery and the work of reparation is in fact salvific and liberative for all, and it is salvific and liberative for white folks as well.
So as Rebecca said, we consider the repertory eco map as kind of the heart of the process. We understand reparations and repair as the center of this 5-circle Venn diagram. We invite folks to start with the truth-telling circle, but it's a circle, so not but the truth-telling portion of the work really calls us, we can't fix what we don't recognize and don't understand. So we'll talk more about the doctrine of discovery and the way that is not just something that lives in history, but lives in the current legacy and landscape of all that's going on in the world right now. So really unearthing what has been either intentionally hidden or by circumstance kind of been part of the waters we swim in, and really reckoning with that. Like I said earlier, at the kind of global level and at the personal or the congregational level, like there's a lot of hard truth that we invite folks to to discover, that's a terrible choice of words, to remember. Yep, to remember, and to like reckon with. The next circle is spiritual practice. And part of that is like like any of us who practice any kind of faith or spiritual practice can see our practice as resource, right? As something that helps ground us and helps hold us even when we're doing that hard work of truth telling. The truth telling will knock people off their central, framing, and it challenges us in ways that like can set off all of the nervous system responses. And so spiritual practice is a way to mitigate against that and to help reground and recenter. And also because we're particularly inviting Christian congregations to engage in this work, there is like an overlap between like there's a responsibility because of the doctrine of discovery, and there's also other narrative, more reparative narrative in the history, tradition, and practices. So we want to hold that in that spiritual practice. Relationship. One of the things that we really focus on with this circle is understanding relationship, not just as interpersonal relationship. Sarah Augustine said, like, there are not enough Indigenous people in the US for all the white folks to have a, an Indigenous BFF, right? So this is not, it can't just all solely be, and I just played a little with that quote, but it can't solely be interpersonal relationship that helps hold us in this work. It can be a helpful like motivator, but it can't be the only thing. So understand a relationship more in organizational relationship or community relationship. So something that your congregation has a relationship with Black and Indigenous community in some way that then you can continue to grow deeper in as the work continues. And followership. So the kind of connecting point between relationship and political solidarity is that posture of followership. So being in relationship with Black and Indigenous community, being in a posture of like both reciprocity and followership, that we're be like white and non-Black or non-Indigenous folks are being shaped by worldview, by paradigm, by lived experience of Indigenous and Black folks, can lead us and invite us into political solidarity. So showing up, how you're asked, when you're asked, and in what ways you're asked, and whatever the political solidarity action might be. Some examples in the last few years are the call to northern Minnesota to stand against the Line 3 pipeline. That was an act of, for many of us, an act of political solidarity. Like we were invited, we were asked to put our physical selves between the Indigenous folks of that area and the, well, the yes.
Law enforcement.
Like all the things. So that political solidarity can be a play between stepping forward when you're asked to be like kind of frontline, or stepping back when you're asked to be support. And so sometimes political solidarity is showing up with the sheet cake because somebody asked you. And sometimes it's putting your physical self between harm and the Indigenous or Black folks that you're in relationship with. And finally, we talk about wealth return that comes then out of all of these other circles, right? That wealth return that's disconnected from truth-telling, spiritual practice, relationship, and political solidarity can be charity, right? It can be a congregation writing a check and then being like, okay, done, check mark. But when it comes out of all that comes out of the other circles, wealth return becomes an act of repair. So it might be a line item on your church budget. It might be land. There are all sorts of ways that our congregations have found to engage in wealth return. But when we talk about reparations, we're talking about that center of the flower, where it all comes together. That's where true repair and healing can come when we do it all together. Speaking of the doctrine of discovery, I'm going to try to fly through this, but it's important to acknowledge this harmful thing that seems like when we talk about like terra nullius in 1095, like that was a really long time ago. I don't know why we're talking about that, but its legacy is so like woven into all the things that are showing up now. So we talk about the doctrine of discovery and these papal bulls from long, long ago, but that formed the justification, religious justification and legal justification for stolen lives, stolen land, and stolen labor, which built what we know of as the United States. So 1095, this idea of like empty land, it's empty and discoverable if there are non-Christians there. Then a few centuries later, this additional papal bull granting that like European monarchs can invade, search out, capture, and subjugate, right? So this is like right there, the justification for chattel slavery, right? The foundation of that. Oh, yep. So you can see like stolen land, stolen lives, and stolen labor, all built into this religious document, right? Okay. So funny thing, the doctrine of discovery gets rebranded every once in a while, right? So we see like a lot of the same assumptions coming out even now in Project 2025, in the New Apostolic Reformation, the idea that the assertion that in order to be human, one has to be European and Christian, now that's transferred into whiteness. Power is primarily power over. Like God created hierarchies, apparently, rooted in dominance and submission, and that dictates how the world is supposed to be ordered. It's God rules over humanity, man rules over woman, humans, who are by definition European Christians and white, rule over everything else. And in order to create and maintain these proper hierarchies of domination, or of dominance and submission, violence is justified and should be used whenever necessary. So you see that same logic from those original papal bulls is still being played out. It just, it gets a little rebranding every once in a while, and here we go. We see what's going on in the world these days. Are you doing this?
I think I'm doing it.
Okay, great.
Excellent. Will, and I just wanted to make the direct connection to the film that we saw on Monday evening. The ways in which the proper hierarchies and Molly, you mentioned nationalism, the white Christian nationalism, presciently, and so I want to talk just a little bit about how the doctrine of discovery is so deeply connected to questions of sexuality and gender. They played a huge role in the doctrine of discovery originally, and the impacts continue to be felt today. The early conquistadors and later civil and religious authorities use sexual practice and gender expression to differentiate between that which is Christian and that which is savage or heathen. And a Christian, and as we said, and therefore a human being, is one who participates in a rigid man-woman binary in which the man has power over the woman. The man is dominant and the woman is submissive in sex and in all other forms of relationship. And embedded into the sexual binary is a gender one. There are only two biological sexes and therefore only two genders. And as we saw in the film, embedded in the logic of European Christian supremacy is virulent misogyny and violent homo, bi, and transphobia. And they're mutually reinforcing. So how do we know someone is human? They practice rigid binary of dominance and submission. And how do we know that a multiplicity of gender expressions is sinful? Is because only heathens and savages practice it. So it's this reinforcing logic. Okay, so we're focusing on the truth-telling circle. And so I want to play a couple of video clips and say a couple more things, and then we're going to send you into some small groups. So this is Mackie Alston, who is a filmmaker and a seminary grad, comes out of the UCC. Let's pray to God that you can hear this.
When I came out to my parents, in my memory, they said they're going to work it out and they'll always love me and there'll always be a place for me in the family. But it would kill the people down south. It would kill their parents.
It stopped.
To know that I'm gay. So would I just please not tell the people down south? I was living in New Jersey at the time. And that idea that I was lethal to my family, that the truth of myself, that the truth is lethal to my family, was a part of the logic of my family. My white Southern family with a history of colonizing and enslaving. It would be lethal if we lived in the light of truth. And I came out to my grandparents, sadly, not as soon as I wish I had. Some of them died before I did. But I realized this is actually a pathway of death, not life. And so when I came out to one grandmother, Mima, I told her I was gay. It's a long time ago. And she said, uh-huh. And I said, Mima, I don't know if you know what this word means, being gay. She said, uh-huh. I said, and that guy I visit you with, Nick, that's my boyfriend, my love interest. She said, uh-huh. I said, Mima. She said, Mackie, give me a break. That you, at this age, that you have somebody to love and that you're happy is all I care about. Can we talk about something more interesting? How is that, Nick? I just think he's adorable. And it was a reckoning for me. It was a relief. It was a turning point. And it made me think two things. What might it mean to be my full self down south or anywhere? What would it mean to tell the truth about who I understand myself to be, but also what other secrets am I complicit or invested in keeping that seem to be keeping me safe, but in fact are death dealing. And so it was then that Selena and I began to make this first film about the legacy of slavery, and part of that film was my own family's history as enslavers. And so on this project, this 4 or 5 year project focused on repair, a question that I've asked myself and a way I've I've explored being is completely honest about my politics and my identities in this very rural southern town. And I think it goes with that question of what is the world for which we long and how do we bring it into being? Well, part of the world for which I long is a world in which everybody gets to be their full selves, economically, vocationally, and in regard sexually, doing no harm, and being free.
So this concept of truth as being lethal and truth as being liberative.
When I
Here we go. So we also want to talk a little bit about the work of Ched Myers and Elaine Enns, and they really draw on the work of James Baldwin. And I just want to read this piece to you, that the doctrine of discovery creates and demands of white people a state of agnosia, similar to the root word for agnostics, like I don't know. By agnosia, they mean socialized ignorance, a state of denying and dissociating. In white settler culture, we don't know and we don't want to know, but we live in a state of buried truth, of socialized ignorance. We are dissociated and haunted by the ghosts of that history. Everywhere we walk, there are stories that the land holds, of violence that we can't ignore. Their book is called Healing Haunted Histories. Just want to play one more quick clip from Mackey about this notion of agnosia.
Is something a secret if everybody knows it, but nobody talks about it. And I feel like the embarrassing, relieving reality is that for many of us in our churches, in our relationships, and in the country, everybody, we are aware of the injustice, the inequity, the harm, particularly as a white person, that I'm doing, that I'm complicit in. But I feel like if I don't talk about it, I can diminish it, when in fact it only exacerbates it and leads to the lack of right relationship across the board. And in the light of it, there is the possibility for a right relationship, not the guarantee, but the possibility. It sounds like that Baldwin quote that not everything faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed if it's not faced. Is something a secret?
So we're going to move into a time where you're going to have a chance to turn, or some of you might need to move, to find a partner. But I want to just tell a little story. There is a woman named Mary Boykin Chestnut who was married to a man who served in Confederate President Jefferson Davis's cabinet. Okay. And she was a supporter of the Confederate cause. In her diaries, though, she articulates this dissociation and disembodiment, that this sense of agnosia that is called for in order to not be overwhelmed by a sense of like compassion or empathy with folks who are being marginalized and oppressed. So I'm just going to read this, and I invite you, as a kind of practice of sacred listening, if it helps you, you can close your eyes or soften your focus while I read. And if it helps you, you can see the text on the screen. I'm going to read this section from her diary, and I want you to listen for what sticks out to you, what shimmers to the surface for you in this reflection. She writes, "A mad woman taken from her husband and children. Of course, she was mad, or she would not have given her grief words in that public place. Her keepers were along. What she said was rational enough, pathetic at times heartrending. It excited me, so I quietly took opium. It enabled me to retain every particle of mind or sense or brains I have, so quiets my nerves that I can calmly reason and take rational views of things otherwise maddening. So here she is. She has this moment of empathy, of connection, maybe mother to mother. She's getting that sense. She feels her heart rend. And in order to maintain her distance and hold up the doctrine of discovery and all the assumptions that go with that, to not face the horror of chattel slavery, she takes opium. She's like literally self-medicating, right? She must quiet her nerves in order to retain every particle of mind. The deadening, numbing effect of opium serves to disembody her. And it allows her to dissociate and no longer feel the pain that that moment of empathy was producing. So I'm going to invite you now to take a few minutes to turn to a neighbor, find one or two people to talk with, reflecting on this. You might start by sharing what shimmered to the surface for you in her diary entry. And then these questions, I'll lift up to you and see what speaks to you in this moment. Do you have any stories from your own family in which ancestors had moments of connection, but then had to deaden, dissociate, numb, or choose passive non-resistance instead of solidarity or empathy? So is there a story in your history that speaks to or resonates with this sense of need to dissociate in order to hold up whiteness in this case? What is the impact of ancestral passive non-resistance? And how might truth-telling and solidarity today help heal and redeem our ancestors or even our own souls? So 5 minutes, maybe 10. Great. I was wondering about that. Yes. So the invitation for those who are on Zoom is to just have the conversation via chat with one another. Thank you. No. Like that's just what I have.
Just don't want to forget it.
No. Okay, friends, this is the part that is always hard for me because I hear how rich conversation is happening, but I want to honor time. So finish up your last thought. Oh, doesn't seem to have. This is the last.
That's the list line.
Oh. Okay, friends. Finish up that last thought. We'll come back to the large group. And hopefully that sparked something. Just based on the conversations, it feels like it did. And that's the invitation is to continue to have those conversations, but maybe not right this moment. Sounds like a great lunch topic. So that is just a taste of the truth-telling circle of the 5 circles of sacred reckonings. And I hope that it sparks something in you all that we're all called in different ways to reckon with the past and to work now toward healing and repair in our current state. And we have a friend and colleague who said the other day, the reason we're here now Project 2025, et cetera, is that we haven't done this work previously. So we are called now to really engage in this work, even though it's hard and uncomfortable and like is going to bring up stuff that none of us want to wrestle with. This is the work in order to build a more healed, more repaired future for all of us, and just to relift up the sense of liberation for all. Like, this isn't just a good thing to do for those people. This is something we do together for the sake of all people.
Does anybody briefly have, was there anything that emerged from your small groups, or do people have questions? T? Oh, no, you were just.
Anybeth?
That was how they were having their small group time. Is there anything in the chat that's that needs to be lifted up? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
No, not particularly. Thank you. It was a good discussion.
My conversation partner lifted up this great phrase, that whiteness keeps us comfortable and righteous to not seeing, some of these things that are right in front of us. For me, like, I grew up thinking that I was proud to be from Minneapolis and Minnesota because I thought we were really good on racial relations. And then you hear about the wage gap and the achievement gap and all of that. So I think some of that's what whiteness does. It stopped me and my really religiously liberal and politically liberal family even from seeing it.
Yep. I love that.
And my conversation partner, who was Andrea, brought up the need for, or the desire for, communal grieving in our faith places of faith practice. Sort of in my experience, the sort of white centric and historically white church settings are very much about like, piety to some degree, but also sort of self-congratulation. And there's not really room. I have not seen public lament and acknowledgement of the griefs that we hold. And maybe we aren't aware of our griefs yet. But boy, are they there historically, generationally. So public lament.
And just to say that circle of spiritual practice, that's one of the pieces that is the most important piece. And just to perhaps complexify a little bit, there is a way in which grief can be used manipulatively. We sort of talk about white women's tears and separating those two pieces, and the practice of lament and mourning and grief and public grieving is critically important to that, because it also is part of the re-embodiment process. That it's much harder to be dissociated if we're actually engaged in genuinely, embodied grief. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add, like, the process of lament means that you're working through and metabolizing that rather than staying stuck in it, because staying stuck in it, the white women's tears, that's a weaponizing of feeling. And we want people to feel and metabolize that feeling so that you can be like moving toward right relationship and right action as comes from the circles and the relationship and political solidarity. So it's not getting stuck in the grief, but actually being able to use that and work through it. So not dissociating and not getting stuck. Like there's a balance in there. I see that someone on the Zoom has their hand raised. And
Hi,
great.
can you hear me? Oh, whoa, am I booming? Hi, this is Amy. Yeah, oh, and talking about lament and grief, that's a great tie-in to our to Derek's presentation. I love the way it's all fitting together. Um, I just I really like the idea of doing this work. I'm really excited about the idea of bringing this work to congregations. And it's resonating with our white folks group. It's dismantling white supremacy group, but focused on the work of white people. And in my congregation, it seems like one of the sessions that we had that resonated most with folks was about our ancestors. And it wasn't particularly reckoning with injustice or anything like that, just talking about our ancestors. What did we know about them? Because it seemed to me that, part of the myth of being a European American is, you don't have any ethnicity, you don't have any ancestors, right? These stories are not passed on to you. You're just white, right? Just a regular American. And it was, I felt like that was grounding work for this. Some people wanted to go there, like they were in this group because they had actively racist ancestors. Yeah, I thought there was just so much. There's like this great silence about our past that there has to be when people are afraid of shame or guilt. If you don't think you're going to be proud of your ancestors, then it's better to just not tell the story.
Well, and I think there's just the last thought, because I'm aware of the time, but the idea of kind of digging into personal family history, some of it is easy for folks who immigrate, more recently, to be like, oh well, my family, they weren't enslavers, so I don't really relate to that story or whatever. But the idea of whiteness has required cutting off a lot of history and culture and ritual and story. And so like, yes, this idea of like I'm just white, or that in some ways gives us, like, for those of us who have that identity, privilege or whatever you want to call it, but it also is a loss, right? So not having that ancestral like well to draw on because we've cut it off and like ignored it for the sake of buying into this project of whiteness, is part of that liberation for all concept. Like just because white body folks have power and privilege doesn't mean they haven't had losses. And so liberation for all invites reconnecting, re-embodying, re-grounding in something that is greater than just whiteness.
So thank you.
Yes.
Yes. So thank you. Yeah, please join me in thanking the Reverends Rebecca and Dana. I'll invite Derek to come on next.